Hello, and welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm your host, Neil Trotter, and in this video, we're going to be talking about, or returning to, one of the power hitters of the field of philosophy. That would be Hegel, and we're going to be talking about his work right here. It's called the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences in outline. So what is this? The Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences in outline. Well, I guess in the, philosophical world, or when you go into philosophy in the context of academia or like major philosophical institutions, Hegel is considered to have the four major works that he wrote, which is the Phenomenology of Spirit, Science of Logic, Philosophy of the Right, and Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. Now this is the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences in outline. So what does it mean, in outline? Well, I'll explain it. So Hegel had envisioned an entire system, right? An entire system of philosophy that he could apply like holistically, right? And he wanted to, he was a professor, and he wanted to teach that entire system. Well, the thing is, he actually wasn't able in his lifetime to thoroughly write out the entire system that he had in his head. He wrote a lot of it, but he didn't write all of it. But he did outline it, right? So this is what that is in outline, right? This whole entire system of philosophy. And he used it as a tool to give to students as like maybe a syllabus or like a kind of overview of okay, this is what I'm going to be teaching you, so get ready. So as such, this work right here is basically the best thing that you can get if you want to understand, or if you want to kind of get an overview or a general understanding of Hegel's intention, of his what he wanted to achieve, the philosophical enterprise, the project, the entire project that he was trying to build up and then implement as a starting point to further philosophy, the field of philosophy in general. So this is a good work if you're like a Hegelian or something, like a huge fan of Hegel, and you want to know, okay, what is his entire enterprise? This is a good overview of that. But are we going to give an overview of the overview in this video? Nah, we don't really do that here at the Black Ponder. We don't do summaries or cliff notes or book reports. That's not the thing we do. What we do here at the Black Ponder is that I read quotes from the text, and then I kind of bring up quotes of interest, passages of interest that I feel highlight or showcase the powerful themes, like major themes of the work, and then we kind of talk about those themes and talk about what we agree with, what we disagree with, what are the significant ideas being presented, why are they significant, are they applicable to today? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. So of course, the major theme of this work is philosophy as an entire project, as a holistic enterprise, right? So we're going to be talking about what is philosophy, right? How do we apply philosophy, okay? And how does philosophy interconnect or is beneficial to other aspects of life? How is it constructive? How can we use philosophy to benefit our lives? That's a big question, right? What is philosophy? I've seen people talk about this. What is philosophy? Try to define it and then kind of give up in the middle of it. I've even seen YouTube videos trying to describe it, and then the YouTube videos are removed, right? Because it's oh, okay, this is actually a bigger question than I thought. This has a comprehensive answer. What really is philosophy? Well, Hegel had a definition, or a description, which is quite involved. That's what we're going to talk about. But we're going to start with the topic or the area of spirituality, because Hegel was all about that spirit. I mean, he did write a major work on that very topic, the phenomenology of spirit. But we're talking about the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences in outline. So let me begin with this first quote right here that I chose. And in case you want to follow along, because plenty of people say, they ask me, can you please give me the quotes or the page numbers of the quotes that you're talking about? So if you have this edition, this is a German library edition. It's by this publisher here, Continuum. Okay, this is German library number 24. If you have that, all right, and if you would like to follow along, this is page 18. This is the end of the 13th to the last line. Okay. The life of spirit is not the life that shrinks from death and keeps itself untouched by devastation, but rather the life that endures it and maintains itself in it. It wins its truth only when, in utter dismemberment, it finds itself. I underline this part. Listen. It is this power, not as something positive, which closes its eyes to the negative. Okay? As when we say of something that it is nothing or is false, and then, having done with it, turn away and pass on to something else. On the contrary, spirit is the power only by looking the negative in the face and tearing with it. This tearing with the negative is a magical power that converts it into being. This power is identical with what we earlier called the subject, which by giving determinantness and existence in its own element supersedes abstract immediacy, i.e., the immediacy which barely is and thus is authentic substance. That being or immediacy whose mediation is not outside of it, but which is this mediation itself. So what's that all about? Let me refer to my notes that I write on the margin. I always write little notes to help me understand what's being said, and I think they help explain to the viewer what's being said as well. So I wrote, subjectivity is reaching truth despite the negativity of life. This struggle is spirit. Spirit is not the negativity itself, but the facing of negativity in pursuit of truth. Okay, so a few things here. Hegel was all about subjectivity and treating the person as a subject, right? Because the person isn't involved, right? The person is a subject involved in life, involved in existence. And that involvement is gonna meet with resistance, the resistance of life, and which part of that resistance is negativity. Right? Life can be negative sometimes. Hegel acknowledged that, but this is what subjectivity is. It is the resisting or, coming to terms with and interacting with that resistance, that negativity that life brings to us. And the process of doing that, that's spirit. Note that spirit is not the negativity in and of itself. The whole saying, life is so negative, right? Life is a bitch, and then you die, right? Well, Hegel doesn't stop there, right? He's like, no, don't focus on the negativity, but acknowledge his presence and persevere. And why are you persevering? To discover truth. But let's keep going. Okay, we're on page 19 now. And this is the middle of the 15th to the last line. Thoughts become fluid when pure thinking, this inner immediacy, recognizes itself as a moment, or when the pure certainty of self abstracts from itself. Not by leaving itself out or setting itself aside, but by giving up the fixity of itself positing. By giving up not only the fixity of the pure concrete, which the I itself is, in contrast with its differentiated content, but also the fixity, the fixity of the differentiated moments, which, posited in the element of pure thinking, share the unconditioned nature of the I. Okay, the I, you know, I, me, that I we're talking about, the letter I, the subject. Through this movement, the pure thoughts become notions. Okay, italicized, notion. Okay, Hegel, that word notion, it's a whole thing, right? It's this concept where that means like there's a going to somewhere. There's an objective. Like reality has an objective, right? That's what the notion is. And he's saying, he makes it plural. So notions, there's objectives that need to be met. But I'll continue. And are only now what they are in truth. Self-movements, circles, spiritual essences, which is what their substance is. And I skipped one line. Regarded as the connectedness of their content, it is the necessary expansion of that content into an organic whole. So what's going on there? Well, a number of things, right? He's talking about the objectivity of reality, the objectivity of existence. What does that mean? That means, as we said before with the notions, like Hegel is saying, reality, existence, there's an objective, there's a meaning, you know, there is a purpose, right? This is what Hegel thinks. But to realize that objectivity, you have to become, you, me, we have to become subjects. We have to actualize our subjectivity, and by actualizing our subjectivity, we help reality achieve its objective, whatever that may be. Let me read you my notes. Objectivity is achieved by an awareness of one's relationship with everything else, one's ecological nature. Because, you know, it's not just me being a subject, it's other people being subjects, because reality is composed of many different subjects. As we know, the world has many different people, many different subjects. And not only do we have a relationship with the other subjects, we have a relationship with reality or existence as a whole. We're all helping to contribute toward reality or life. You know, this collective being that we all share together. Okay, so I'm going to move to page 36, and this is the second paragraph. Usually, the subject is first made the basis as the objective fixed self. I skip down a line. That subject is replaced by the knowing I itself, which links the predicates with the subject holding them. But, I skip down 2 lines, the knowing I still finds in the predicate what it thought it had finished with and got away from, and from which it hoped to return into itself. And instead of being able to function as the determining agent in the movement of predication, arguing back and forth whether to attach this or that predicate, it is really still occupied with the self of the content, having to remain associated with it instead of being for itself. So what's being said in that passage is what we were just talking about. You know, this back and forth relationship with my subjectivity and the objectivity of reality as a whole, right? Reality is this objective. It is this notion, this going to something. And my subjectivity is contributing to that going to something, that objectivity. And it's this constant back and forth of I'm expressing my subjectivity, my individuality, my purpose, myself. I'm expressing that in relation to and in service of the objective of reality, the collective universal objective. That back and forth is happening. You know, it's a kind of a contradiction, right? Because it's an objectified subjectivity or subjectivity in the service of objectification. And Hegel's all about contradictions, but in Hegel's definition of contradictions, they're not antagonistic, right? They're serving each other. They're opposites, but they're opposites that are mutually creating. Let me continue. I skipped down 2 lines. The distinction of the subject and predicate is destroyed by the speculative proposition and the proposition of identity, which the former contains. The counter-thrust against that subject-predicate relationship, this conflict between the general form and of a proposition and the unity of the notion, which destroys it. Now I'm going to skip down to the second to last line of that paragraph. The subject itself falls into the universal. This is the unity in which that accent dies away. Okay, so what was that all about? Well, I'm going to continue right where I left off, and we're going to connect it. We're going to tie it together. So, to illustrate what has been said, in the proposition, God is being, the predicate is being. Being. It has the significance of something substantial in which the subject is dissolved. Being is here meant to be not a predicate, but rather the essence. It seems consequently that God ceases to be what he is from his position in the proposition, viz. A fixed subject. Here, thinking instead of making progress in the transition from subject to predicate, in reality, feels itself checked by the loss of the subject, and missing it is thrown back onto the thought of the subject. Okay, now we're going to refer to my notes to get a handle of what's going on. I wrote, God is not simply a subject. Okay? Rather, God is an actualizing relationship, a being. Okay? So it's interesting because that's another question that has a lot of theological and as well as philosophical implications. Like people ask, what is God? You know, one answer is God is love, and then another big answer is God is being. Right? So what does that mean? That means it's in Hegel's mind. What that means is God is an actualization, an actualizing. God is a manifesting. Manifesting into what? We don't know. Or like, that's not even being discussed. What's being discussed, Hegel, and Hegel's all about like the going to something, from something to something. So going from point A to point B or whatever, the progression, the moving from to, right? The actualizing, the manifesting. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. But there is a destination, that's the point. The destination is not of key importance. What is of key importance is the going to the destination. But it is important to have a destination because there's a going to it, right? So it's not like some sort of nihilistic type of thinking where it's like, oh, there is no destination. We're just going. Well, Hegel's not about that. He's like, no, there is somewhere. There is some point where we're going to stop, right? Or we're headed towards somewhere. But what's important for us as subjects is the heading in and of itself. So I skip down 6 lines. Similarly to when one says the actual is the universal. The actual as subject disappears in its predicate. The universal is not meant to have merely the significance of a predicate, as if the proposition asserted only the actual is universal. On the contrary, the universal is meant to express the essence of the actual. Thinking, therefore, loses the firm objective basis it had in the subject when, in the predicate, it is thrown back onto the subject, and when, in the predicate, it does not return into itself, but into the subject of the content. So, basically what Hegel's saying is the subjectivity is important. Yes, there's an objective. Let's bring it let's ground this discussion. Right? There is a meaning or purpose to life. That's what Hegel is saying. There's an objective. But the objective lies with the subject. Right? It's not only about the objective. We're not simply objectifying ourselves to go toward the goal. Rather, we need to express our subjectivity. That's the only way we'll be able to arrive at the objective, the goal, the notion, or to realize the notion. This is important to understand because Hegel is all about subjectivity. Hegel is all about, look, we gotta come to terms with our subjective being, with our individual being. We don't need to lose sight of that. That if we lose sight of it, then we're not going to be able to come to terms with the objective of reality, or the objective of what we're here to do, right? Our purpose. At the same time, there is an objectification, right? There is a relationship between my subjective self and the overall objective truth. There's a relationship between subjects and the objective. So there's an ecology, there's an interconnectedness. Okay, I am on page 38, and this is the last sentence of the first paragraph. We learn by experience that we meant something other than we meant to mean. And this correction of our meaning compels our knowing to go back to the proposition and understand it in some other way. And I put in my notes, being is experiential actualization. So it's us actualizing, meaning it's us expressing a subjectivity. It's discovering ourselves. It's finding who we are. It's discovering the truth and then realizing that truth. Is doing that through an experience, the experience of being. So again, we go back to meeting with the reality of life, the resistance, the negativity, coming to terms with it, pushing through it, meeting it head on, even kind of wrestling with it. And through that experience of understanding and coming to terms with who we are, our true nature as individuals, as subjects, reality, existence can then express itself, right? Or meet its objective. This is spirituality, right? It's an awareness of one's individual subjectivity in relation to the objective of reality. That's what the phenomenology of spirit, not the book phenomenology of spirit, but the actual spirit as the phenomenology, like the phenomenon of spirituality, the awareness of actualizing, and awareness and actualization of interconnectivity or interconnectedness to meet the objective of reality. That is spirituality, or the phenomenon of spirit, or the phenomenology of spirit. This is what Hegel teaches, right? This is what he believes spirituality is. And then he goes further into that in his book, The Phenomenology of Spirit. But this is an overview. Now that we talked about that, spirituality, what is it? Let's go to what is philosophy, which we asked that question at the beginning of the video. And it's all we're gonna go on back, circle out. You might say like, okay, we talked about spirituality. Why are we talking about the definition of philosophy? Well, it's all gonna tie back together. So this is page 51, and it is the second paragraph. Philosophy is the encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences. Insofar as its entire scope is presented through the specific differentiation of its parts. And it is a philosophical encyclopedia insofar as the differentiation and the connection of its parts. The connection of its parts, okay, is an ecology, is an interconnectedness. But I continue. Are presented according to the necessity of the concept. Since philosophy is rational knowledge throughout Each of its parts is a philosophical whole, a circle of totality containing itself within itself. But the philosophical idea is also within each particular determinancy or element. The individual circle thus ruptures itself because it is in itself a totality. It breaks through the limit of its own elements and establishes another sphere. The whole presents itself then as a circle of circles, in which each circle is a necessary moment, in that the system of its characteristic elements constitutes the whole idea, which also appears in each individual part. So what's going on here? Philosophy utilized constructively is systematic. Okay, philosophy is a systematic process. It's not just simply a collection of ideas or thoughts or just epiphanies or revelations. Right? It's an entire system. It's like an interconnected or enterprise. But I'll continue. Philosophy is also essentially encyclopedic, since the true can only exist as totality and only through the differentiation and determination of its differences can it be the necessity of totality and the freedom of the whole. It is, therefore, necessarily systematic. Philosophizing without a system cannot be scientific. Moreover, if it expresses for itself primarily a subjective perspective, its contents are contingent, for the contents are only justified as a moment of the whole, and outside of the whole rest on ungrounded presuppositions or have only subjective certainty. Okay. It's a lot, but we're just saying what we've kind of already been saying. Is like, okay, philosophy is a system, and it involves subjects, interconnected subjects. It's a process, an interconnected process. That interconnectivity indicates a kind of ecosystem. So, okay, we use the word ecology. It's interconnected relationships meeting objectives. It's not just one notion. As Hegel put, is notions, plural. But let me continue. It is a mistake to confuse a system of philosophy with a philosophy that is derived from a single principle. We just said it. On the contrary, the principle of true philosophy contains all particular principles in itself. Okay? So, there's an objective, an overall objective, but that overall objective is composed of several different objectives, right? And so what does all that mean? What I'm saying is that, sure, there might be an overall objective, but that overall objective is very complex or complicated, and so it can be broken down as you see it. So the best that we can interpret or comprehend the overall objective is a set of interconnected objectives. Let me consult my notes here. Effective philosophy considers multiple subjectivities. So an effective philosophy considers many different kinds of perspectives, right? Subjects, individuals, various different beings, but it considers them, and when we use the word consider, what I'm saying is all these different and diverse perspectives and individualities and subjects, they're all contributing to our overall reality. And this is what philosophy is that kind of consideration. Philosophy of only one subjectivity presents falsehoods. Right? So it's very important to not get caught up in a trap of, just thinking about one philosophy or one perspective or one subjective or one subjectivity as the most important one. Rather, no, we need to acknowledge many different individuals, many different subjects, and understand that they're all in a way contributing to the reality, this thing we call life or existence. But here we are on the fifth to the last line. Science is not to be presented in the scientific development of its particularity, but is to be limited to the beginnings and basic concepts of the particular sciences. I skip down 4 lines. In truth, therefore, the whole of philosophy constitutes one science, but it may also be viewed as a whole composed of several particular sciences. As we discussed, various objectives achieved through a system of processes, which are, philosophies, all contributing to an overall notion or objective. This is what philosophy is. Philosophy as an ecosystem is not a grand cohesive schema. Rather, it is an interconnected set of particular schools of thought which may or may not necessarily interrelate with each other, but definitely interconnect with each other. They might not be related to each other, but they are contributing together to some collective objective. Okay, so we are on page 53, and this is line 13. The unity that brings the sciences together in such an assemblage is because they are gathered extrinsically at the same time only external in ordering. For the same reason, this arrangement must, especially since the materials are also of a contingent nature, remain an experiment, and we will always exhibit incongruent aspects. Okay, and that's basically saying, will we ever truly know the overall objective of reality? No, because the entire system that is necessary to achieve this overall objective is incredibly complex and has all these moving parts, all these different subjects, all these different individuals, schools of thoughts, interconnected ways of being, all these different perspectives. But just because we can't comprehend the overall objective of reality doesn't mean we can't contribute to its overall purpose. We're doing it now by being subjects, by expressing our subjectivity. And the more we're able to express our subjectivity, the more we can contribute to the objective of reality. But there must be an awareness of that interconnectedness, right? That ecology, that ecosystem. And I put in my notes, although not always interconnected, there is an order or logic to sequence of philosophical development over time. So there is a kind of logic or like a sequential logic of philosophy as it developed over time throughout human history. It might not be interrelated or like, the systems of the past or of different parts of the world might not specifically relate to each other like directly, but they're all contributing to an overall outcome that we see in the world. And there's a logic to that. You can, even though they're not related, like the philosophies of Africa, which is largely neglected in the Western civilization, right? Those philosophies might not be related to the philosophies of the Western world. I mean, really the Western world, right? But they are contributing heavily to the overall reality of existence, even though they might not be specifically related to each other. And when we become aware of that, we are more equipped to moving forward progressively, constructively. So there is a kind of awareness of interconnectedness, right? An awareness of our subjectivity as it contributes to the objective. That's philosophy, right? But then the going about and doing it, the actual being subjects in relation to the objective and being part of the interconnectedness of reality as individual subjects, that's spirituality. So there's a relationship and interconnection, right, even between philosophy as defined by Hegel and spirituality as defined by Hegel. The philosophy is the awareness of such and the developing of those systems to take part in the objectivity of reality through being subjects, okay, the developing of those systems, and the spirituality is then the carrying forth or manifesting or actualizing those systems. And that's what Hegel's talking about. I will read you some passages that explain this more in depth. This is page 67. It is the second paragraph. The demand made fashionable by Kantian philosophy that prior to actual cognition, the faculty of cognition should be investigated critically offers itself on first glance as a plausible alternative. But this investigation is itself cognitive, and to claim that it could be initiated without cognition is meaningless. Furthermore, even the assumption of a faculty of cognition before actual cognition is a presupposition, both of the unjustified category or determination of faculty or power, and of a subjective cognition, a presupposition which belongs to the former one. Logic, by the way, is also part of that required investigation, and more truly than the critical method, which would have to proceed in a limited way on the basis of its own presuppositions and according to the nature of its own ability. Okay, so what's being said there? So we begin with kind of a critique of Kant. See, Kant, pushed the idea of a priori, which is, a thing in and of itself, existing without any experiential reality. It's just a thing that always existed, right? As opposed to a posteriori, which is things that exist through an experiential reality, right? But what Hegel's saying here is that a priori isn't a thing, a real actual thing, because a posteriori conceptualizes, right? Our experience is what helps us conceptualize a priori things, right? And therefore manifests a priori, meaning that, the objective doesn't exist, right? Let's think of it, let's use Hegelian terms, whereas, the objective only exists, the objective reality can only exist by the experience of subjects actualizing, right, manifesting. Objectivity can only exist through subjectivity, meaning abstract ideas only exist through experiential being, right? So again, Hegel is all about there has to be a process, a going from to something, a going to something from something, right? A kind of experiential being has to take place for anything to happen, right? Even abstract things. So this is page 69. This is the third to the last line of the first paragraph. A substratum whose thought, which is the central point, is contained entirely in the predicate. The subject then, as well as the form of the thesis, is completely superfluous. Right, is what we're saying. So we're saying the being must exist for the objective of the being to exist, or whatever the being becomes, the becoming, or the thing that has happened, or the thing that happens, only exists by the happening, right? It's the whole cause and effect thing. The emphasis is the effect, right? Effect underlined, but the cause is important too. The cause definitely exists, but you don't want to just put weight on one and not consider the other one. So I continue on page 69. This is the last line here. Precisely this awareness of beginnings should be kept in mind. There are nothing but empty abstractions, and one is as empty as the other. The drive to find a fixed significance in being or in both is the very necessity which leads further and gives them true significance. Okay, Okay, let me go back and read you some of my notes here. Existence actualizes only as a process of lived experience. Existence without being as a process is emptiness / nothingness. And that's kind of like the age-old idea of, you know, abstraction or theory without practicality. But, you know, it's not just that. It's not just practicality in the terms of like, well, if I can't apply this to real life or to anything that I'm doing, what's the point? Hegel is saying something a little deeper than that. What he's saying is, sure, like there's abstraction, and you know, they're abstract objects, but really they only exist within a context, right? They don't exist without a context. If there's no context for these abstract things, then they really don't exist, right? And that context is experience. It's being. It's a lived or experienced reality. It's only through that lived or experienced reality do these abstract objects exist. Well, I'll continue where I left out. Well, actually, I'm going to skip one line here. The reflection that finds deeper determination for being and nothingness is logical thought, through which such determinations evolve, though not in an accidental, but in a necessary way. Every following significance, therefore, is only to be seen as a more precise specification and truer definition of the absolute. Such a definition is then no longer an empty abstraction like being and nothingness, but rather a concrete entity in which both being and nothingness are moments. That's what we're saying, right? We're saying the abstract objects, or the a priori, or the things that exist without experience, are kind of like empty nothingness, but they're there, right? But they only become concrete, they become real through an being, through an exponential reality, a kind of manifesting and actualizing, a subjectivity. Their objectivity does not really exist without subjectivity. I skip down the line. The highest form of nothingness for itself is freedom. That's key. But freedom is negativity when it sinks into itself to its greatest intensity, and is itself also affirmation. So, okay. Now we're getting into this notion of freedom. So how does freedom, free will, relate to spirituality and philosophy? Well, now I skipped down one line. The truth of being and nothingness is accordingly the unity of both. The unity is becoming. Okay, so now I'm going to go to page 71. This is the 9th line. Indeed, the teaching of philosophy is precisely what frees people from an infinite crowd of finite aims and intentions, by making them so indifferent that it would be all the same to them if such things exist or not. Philosophy is disregard of their essential purposes and the observation of their absolute existence, and the idea simply under the rubric of being. Such concrete objects are more than mere beings or non-beings. Barren abstractions like being and nothingness, and they are the most barren, precisely because they are characterizations of the beginning, are inadequate to express the nature of these objects. If, therefore, such a concrete entity is introduced, something quite typical of thoughtlessness occurs. Namely, it takes up an issue that was entirely out of the question, for here the discussion concerns only abstract being and nothingness. So I wrote in my notes here, this is the trap that Hegel feels philosophy is in. You know, this is his critique. He's saying it's obsessed with existence without meaning, or, you know, existence without context, or existence without experience. But I'm not trying to say like what Hegel's arguing is that classic debate of theory versus practicality. Like, oh, you know, because, you know, Hegel is accused of that often. He's like, man, this guy, all he writes is just about stuff that I can't apply any of this to the real world or reality. He's just saying just abstract nonsense. And that's a general critique of philosophy from like people who don't really like philosophy, right? They're like, man, all they do is talk about abstract ideas. They don't really talk about anything that has to do with the real world, right? It's funny because Hegel's kind of saying, yeah, philosophy does fall into that trap, and we need to make sure that we don't fall into that trap, because that's not real philosophy. When philosophy is just talking about abstract things and not talking about the context of those abstract things, not talking about how those abstract things relate to subjects in the actual world. But on top of that, they're not just focusing on the subjects. There is an abstraction, there is objectivity, but there's a relationship between the abstract ideas, objects, non-beings, and the being. And beings in Hegel's framework is, the going to and from. That's what it means to be. It's not some, it is a subjectivity. It is an individual, but that individual is a going from point A to point B, a progression, a development. And that I write a straight line, but it could be zigzagging. You might be going A, Z, X, W, E, D. It could be going all over the place. But the point is it's a going. That's what subjectivity is, right? It's not a point, right? It's a continuum, it's a spectrum, it's a process. And I skip down 4 lines. What is understood by forming a concept? Forming a concept, an abstraction, right? What's understood by that? Well, though is actually more, namely a more differentiated and richer state of mind, so that such a concept will appear as a concrete case and one more familiar to the ordinary practices of thought. Insofar, however, as this incomprehensibility expresses the unfamiliarity of holding on to abstract thoughts without any sensible elements, there is nothing left to say but that philosophical knowledge is different from the knowledge one is accustomed to every day, as well as from the knowledge that dominates the other sciences. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. So this is the 6th line of page 72. What is the very opposite of being? Namely, nothingness. Okay? So we're saying, if there's no being, if there's no manifesting or actualizing, going to something, from something, then there's nothing, right? But I skipped down 3 lines. The thing does not yet exist in its beginnings, but it is more than merely nothing, for its being is already in its beginning. Beginning is used with an awareness of further advancement. Okay, there needs to be an advancement. Okay. Becoming is in fact, however, also only a beginning, for it must proceed further. Okay, it's a manifesting or an self-actualization continuously. That's what this spirit acting of a spirit is. The spirituality, and the awareness or the developing of that is a philosophy. It becomes, because it contains a contradiction in itself, that which has become determinate being. So my notes, existing without being is emptiness. To begin initiates meaning, but for that meaning to perpetuate, one must continue to become, not just simply exist. Okay? There is a constant development, a constant subjectivity. Now, I go to page 73. This is the 2nd paragraph. Determinate being is being with determinacy, which is an immediate or subsisting mode or quality. Since, however, nothingness constitutes its ground, non-being is posited as an equally immediate aspect of determinate being, and otherness. The quality exists in itself, therefore as a relation to another, because it is its own moment. In this being for another, which subsists at the same time as a relation to itself, quality is reality. Okay, so I put in my notes, life with an objective is where existence gains meaning, right? And so you might say, well, You shouldn't be obsessed with objectivity or like achieving things or, you know, objectifying yourself. But that, what Hegel is saying, that objectivity, the object of life is achieving your subjectivity. It's to manifesting your subjectivity. You know, finding yourself, your true nature, who you truly are, discovering it, and using that individual true self to construct, to create, to progressively advance society in reality. That subjective reality is what Hegel is talking about. Reality as pure relation to itself and immediately and indifferently contrasted to otherness is something with qualities or reality that are different from the breadth of its determinate being, namely relations to others. Okay, ecology, right? The relating subjective subjects relating to other subjects. Why is that important? Because that's how we manifest our subjectivity meaningfully, or in other words, we don't obsess with our subjectivity and we don't forget about the objective of reality. And we just focus only on self and individual. That's bad too. So how do we not focus or obsess over individuality? Well, we do it by remembering the objective, which is remembering or relating with other subjects in positive ways, acknowledging the ecology. The objectivity actualizes as a subject for another. So let me read you this sentence at the end of page 93. Reality is the immediate unity of essence with existence, or for interior with exterior. Again, it's combining the objective with subjective. Essence, the unity of essence, individual essence, self, subjective or subject, with existence, the universal objective, the notion, right, of the world. Okay, the world. Hegel is saying that that's ultimately the reality of things. So, how do we do that? How are we able to manifest our subjectivity to help contribute to the objective of reality, of existence? Well, Hegel has mentioned the word freedom, right? He's talking about freedom, and he would argue free will is the way. Our ability to freely manifest our subjectivity. I will read you page 200. This is the top. Spirit has for us nature as its presupposition, of which it is truth. In this truth, its concept, nature, has disappeared. Spirit has therefore produced itself as idea, of which the concept is both the object and the subject. This identity is absolute negativity, because in the nature, the concept has its completely external objectivity. But it has suspended its articulation, and in this it has become identical with itself. It is this identity only insofar as it is a return from nature. So again, we're bringing up negativity. It's a kind of like meeting of the resistance of living, right? Why? Because, it's a contradiction, right? As we were talking about subjectivity, objectivity. Well, how do I, treat myself as a subject when I'm when I'm objectifying myself for the purposes of reality or overall existence? I'm objectifying myself, but at the same time, I am manifesting my subjectivity. So that contradiction, right, is going to create some conflict, some problems, but that conflict is necessary, is what Hegel is arguing. So how do we deal with this contradiction? Right? I'll continue. The essence of the spirit is therefore freedom, the identity of the absolute negative of the concept with itself. Okay, the acknowledgement, the acknowledgement of this negativity, this resistance, this contradiction. It can distance itself from everything external and from its own externality as well as from its being, and thus bear infinite pain, the negation of its individual immediacy. Okay, yeah, so we're constantly struggling with this. There's this pressure, right, from reality, because reality is going to manifest itself too. It's going to meet its objective. It's doing it now. But it needs us as subjects to do that. But by doing that, we objectify ourselves. So, there's this constant pressure of be a subject, but objectify yourself to exist. And that can bear in kind of infinite pain. A negation of its individual immediacy, the subjectivity, that's what's being negated. In other words, it can be identified for itself in its negativity. This possibility is its self-contained being in itself, its simple concept, or absolute generality itself. So I'll refer to from some of my notes. The spirit is an awareness of its dual nature as a contradiction, the reality that it is both the universal ecology, that is existence, and an individual apart from the ecology. Okay? Let me continue where I left off here in the book. This generality is also, however, its determinate sphere of being. So the contradiction is necessary for reality to meet its objective. That's what's so crazy about it. But that's reality. That's what Hegel is saying. Like this is how it works. Reality is a contradiction. With a being of its own, the general is self-particularizing, yet remains self-identical. The nature of the spirit is therefore manifestation. That's what we talked about. It's a manifest. It's not an endpoint, right? Rather, it is a manifestation, an actualization. That's how the contradiction becomes non-antagonistic, right? Although, there's still that pain, that conflict, that resistance. But, there is not like an absolute opposition. There's a progression, a manifestation. The spirit is not determinate as a being in itself and against its externality, nor does it reveal something. Instead, its determinacy and content are this relevation in itself. Its possibility is therefore an immediate, infinite, and absolute reality. Okay? Listen, I'm just going to continue. The revelation is the positing of its objectivity, which is in the abstract idea as the immediate transition or becoming of nature. But the revelation of the spirit, which is free, is the positing of nature as its world, a setting forth which, as reflection, is at the same time the presupposition of the world as a nature existing independently. But the true revelation is revelation in the concept, the creation of the world as its being, a being in which the spirit has the positivity and truth of its freedom. Interesting. Let me read you my notes. It is through the freedom to engage in the ecology of existence, by manifesting as apart from it, is the pain of being, the reality of the contradiction. Okay, so we have to be free to manifest our subjectivity, but we also are required to interact with the overall existence of reality. And so that clash between our subjective selves and the overall collective objectivity of reality, it's rough. There's a conflict there, but that's reality. Right? That's what existence is. But there's a way to not eliminate the pain that is existence by this contradiction, but to deal with it, traverse through it. How do we do that? This is the second paragraph of page 206. The soul, as a concept in itself in general, isolates itself as the individual subject. But this subjectivity is here considered only as the individuation of natural characteristics. I skipped down 3 lines. Immediate judgment is the awakening of the individual soul, which confronts its unconscious natural life, in the first instance as one natural characteristic and condition confronts another. Skip down 5 lines. The differentiation of itself from its undifferentiated generality. Okay. The differentiation, the subject, and its undifferentiated generality, the object. Skip down 3 lines. A return from the world of specialization, from dispersion into details where it has become rigidified into the general essence of subjectivity, which is the substance of those specialized energies. Okay, so what's being said here is the soul. He's bringing up the soul. So we're talking about spirituality now. And it's this whole process. It's isolating the individual subject. So understanding yourself as a subject, isolating it, and then merging it back into the objective, the indifferentiated generality. And it even says, or Hegel even says, when you lock yourself into specialization, where you just focus on the subject, your soul becomes rigidified into the general essence of subjectivity. And that's the essence of those specialized energies. So when the soul only focuses on expressing itself as an individual subject, not in relation to the general reality or the world as a whole, when it's not expressing itself globally, let's say, or universally, even more so, right? It becomes rigid. Arguably, it becomes less free. So then we go back to the concept of free will. Free will is the ability to express one's objectivity through a relationship with the universal, what everything else is doing. Like, how can I, as a subject, contribute to the objectivity or the objective of what's going on here? I wish that maybe I should have a picture of the universe, right? Or the multiverse. I don't know, that might be too big, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that's free will enables us to create a kind of meaning or a kind of relationship with the overall existence, and that is what helps us get through this infinite pain, this negativity that becomes really apparent when we only focus on us as a subject without considering the objective of reality or the universal whole. So this is page 241 at the end. Spirit in the immediacy of its absolute freedom is individual, but one that knows its individuality as an absolute free will. It is 1, a person, the abstract and insofar subjective self-knowledge of this freedom. So first you have to be aware of your personhood, and you have to be aware of your subjectivity. You have to be aware of that. And 2, for the personality, since it is the subjective and therefore as immediate a person, negation, or reality, in its abstraction is an external existence which is found at hand. But in its immediate form, this reality is devoid of will. And the thing which is objective in contrast to the subjectivity of intelligence, of the intelligence and choice, is in contrast to the subjectivity insofar as it is a person, a nullity in and for itself, which the person takes as an accident, the external sphere of freedom, possession. And that's the contradiction of will, right? When will is just obsessed with the self, it starts manifesting as a kind of possessive entity. You know, it just wants to possess for itself, right? It becomes like an ego. The will develops further as an ego, and it just wants to possess. But then, by doing that, it just creates infinite pain, negativity. I'll continue. By the judgment of possession in the first place, through external appropriation, the thing acquires the predicate of mine. But this predicate has the meaning here that I invest my personal will into it, which is absolute. With this meaning, possession is property, which as possession is a means, but as existence of the personality is an end. So not only is this happening, you know, negatively with other subjects, it's happening within oneself. Right? This is the trap that you have to watch out for. Possessing oneself as an object for oneself, expressing subjectivity through one's own objectification. Okay, and this could happen even when we're trying to do the right thing, where we realize our subjectivity, we become individuals, and then we objectify ourselves completely to whatever is going on in reality, right? But that can have a negative consequence too. The key strategy here is to balance, right? Don't just completely objectify yourself. Always keep in mind your subjectivity, but also don't obsess with your subjectivity. Keep in mind the objective reality of everything else. My will is thus in the first place external and for others, in that I am as a person the infinite relation of myself to myself. I am the absolute repulsion of myself from myself. Have my realization only in the being of other people, and only then am I a real person for myself. Okay. The only way we are able to actualize our subjectivity to become true subjects, to express ourselves as individuals, is through the being of other people. Like, other people have to acknowledge our individuality for us to become individuals, right? And so there's this easy trap to objectify ourselves so that other people will acknowledge us as individuals. And but Hegel is saying, be careful, be careful. The thing is the mean by which the extremes meet. These extremes are the people who, in the knowledge of their identity with others, are simultaneously mutually independent. For them, my will has its definitely recognizable existence in the thing through the immediate bodily act of taking possession, through the formation of the thing, or it may be the mere designation of the thing. My notes say, we objectify ourselves for others to manifest subjectivity, or a sense of free will. We then objectify others to express free will. So I will continue though. This is page 244. It is mediated by the arbitrary judgment of each individual, which makes a certain thing into their property as against the others. Recognition is recognition not only of the abstract, but of the real personality of others, that is, of their judgment. And what is or could be my property is dependent on them, as well as on their judgment of what is mine. So what I'm saying, to reference my notes here, the will is expressed freely through the medium of judgment, societal expectations. So what we're talking about here is when the subject and the object become off kilter, off balance. There has to be a relationship between the subject and the object for a positive progression, a positive manifestation to occur. But it's easy to fall off the rails and for either side to take off, throwing off the contradiction of reality or making that contradiction antagonistic instead of non-antagonistic. I'll continue. Because of the external relation in this judgment, it has contingency in the first place, in such a way that the general substance of the predicate, namely the free will of the personality, is recognized, but the thing is subsumed under one law by the particular will of these several people. I skip down 3 lines. Secondly, however, people themselves relate to each other in the syllogism of the law as immediate extremes reflected into each other, and their actual recognition is only through the suspension of the immediacy of each through its free self-determination, not through coercion. The reflection of the individual into its subjective immediacy and the negation of the general side of the predicate of possession, namely the negation of the free personality of the other, is an infinite judgment which, as an action, is the crime. So, I put in my notes here, the contradiction of free will is not antagonistic if the objectivity is not exploited, meaning free will exists only as a non-antagonistic contradiction, a mutual dialectic. So what Hegel is saying is, look, not through coercion. The contradiction between the subjective and the objective can be progressive, constructive, if we acknowledge the subjectivity of everybody, right? If we acknowledge everybody as a meaningful subject, meaning like every single person can contribute in some way positively to the overall objective, then we can all objectify ourselves to the progression of the universal, right? And then that contradiction remains non-antagonistic. But when we start like objectifying ourselves and objectifying others by not acknowledging their subjectivity, that's when things get messed up. That's when we get lost into the objectivity of reality, and there's resistance for the reality as a whole to achieve its object because certain subjects aren't contributing to its achievement. This is page 245. This is the 14th to the last line at the end. A natural condition is therefore a condition of violence and injustice, of which nothing truer may be said than that one ought to depart from it. Society, by contrast, is the condition in which only the law has reality. What is to limit and to sacrifice are precisely the caprice and violence of the state of nature. I put in my notes. Only through society does our freedom have meaning. So, what am I saying there? What I'm saying is, and what Hegel is saying is, your subjectivity becomes constructive, becomes progressive, when it's in service of advancing the objective of the universal reality. I keep pointing to the map here, but I think it paints a good picture. The world is full of all these individuals, right? And we have to, and what Hegel is saying is all these individuals are contributing to some massive notion, some massive objective. What's that objective? Well, that's not the point. The point is not to answer, well, what's the whole objective, right? The point is that whatever the objective is, we're all contributing to it, right? And for us to contribute to it, for us to meet that objective, we all have to realize our individual subjectivity. But it's that lack of awareness that we are all contributing to the objective. Some of us believe that certain individuals, when they express themselves truthfully, when they manifest their true subjectivity, they're actually not contributing to the objective of reality, right? They're actually pushing progress back. But Hegel's not saying that. Hegel is saying, no. We need to allow every single person the freedom to express their true subjectivity. Once that happens, we allow reality, we allow existence to fully meet its objective, unhinged, right? And that's what we want. When we don't acknowledge people's subjectivity, that's when we run into problems, because then existence as a whole cannot achieve its objective, its goal. So free will is the ability to express our true nature in the service of ultimate reality. And how do we be free? Well, we do it by philosophy, right? Building systems that better enable us to not only discover our true subjectivity, our individuality, but help us contribute our subjectivity, our individuality, to the progression of whatever it is we're all here to do. And then spirituality is the doing of that, right? Okay, we got the systems in place, the philosophy is there. Now we actually have to go about and do that. That's what spirituality is. So that's the relationship, right, between spirituality, philosophy, free will. Okay, 3 points in a triangle. And that triangle is ultimate reality, right? Right? And when those 3 things aren't met properly, ultimate reality becomes blocked. We get kind of like clouded or held back. And it is in this way that we can apply Hegel's philosophy to achieve betterment in society, in the world, and to ourselves. Don't get Hegel twisted. Some people will tell you, oh, Hegel, he just says some you know, some really out there crazy things. I don't understand what he's talking about. He's, you know, I wish he would just talk in a way that makes sense or that's applicable to what I'm going through. The experiences I deal with, well, he does, right? You just kind of have to do a little work. I mean, he's not the most straightforward communicator. In fact, he's kind of a pretty bad communicator, but, you know, he's talking about really complicated things, you know, life, its meaning, its purpose, why are we here, what are we here for? These are complicated issues. I don't know, I think it would be quite beneficial if you were to read Hegel's Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, even in outline. You know, you'll have to even read the whole thing, which I'm not even sure if there's a complete version of the, you know, the philosophical sciences. I think he wasn't able to finish that whole thing, but we have his outline if you want to check that out. And if you're like a Hegelian or you're like a true fan and you want to know his, you know, what his goal was for his entire system of philosophy, it's a great book to read. But I think we will conclude here. And I just want to thank you for watching another episode of The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.